Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. Good morning, all. I am Michelle Berge. I'm the General Counsel for Denver Public Schools.
And joining us online, Brianna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Brianna Mestas. I am the PEVC representative.
And we also have Nichelle with us today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nichelle Ortiz from APS Board of Education. I will be there in person shortly as well. Just a heads up there. Sorry.
Nope, no problem. 7 a.m. comes very early. Thank you for joining us. So I'll now call this meeting to order. Our first item on our agenda is an approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
To approve the February 22nd, 2022 minutes.
Do I have a second? So we're actually, just to be clear, I think we need to approve the agenda first, then the minutes. It's a little backwards on there. No, that's okay. That's all right. So let's go back. Do I have a motion to approve our agenda for this morning?
April 19th, 2022.
Do I have a second? Oh, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye. And those opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Now we will move to approve the minutes from February 22nd, 2022. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February 22nd, 2022? Do I have a second?
Second.
Brianna seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. So motion passes. I will now turn it over to Chad to share the executive director report.
Thank you for being here with us this morning. You also have a copy of this in your board packets. Thank you to our guests for coming out to be a part of listening to this conversation today of the districts. So I just want to begin by thanking all of you for being members of our Board of Cooperative Education Services, as well as your team of district council and your district or district representatives for joining us this morning to review the Intergovernmental Agreement, IGA. I know this is early. I know all of you are very busy in your districts. I know that we are a small institution that's been in place for the past 29 years. And so I thank all of you for being here and participating in this process today. As a school community, we value this collective partnership and look forward to our continued success in providing an expeditionary learning school to our member partners. We are actively engaged at school as a K-12 institution in giving the CMOS and the PSAT, SAT cycle of exams. We have approximately 95% participation rate across all grade levels. We're in the final week this week of 3rd grade and 5th grade taking their test. Our students in high school completed the PSAT and SAT last week. We will take this data when it's released. We disaggregate it down to students by standard and determine targeted areas for growth that we will speak to in our strategic planning for next year around hiring. We appreciate the support of the community in administering of this assessment as it provides one indicator in a strong body of evidence for determining student achievement. I want to recognize and specifically thank many of you saw Marcy Elder, our Director of Educational Operations, when you came in today. She is also our District Assessment Coordinator and runs this entire process for a K-12 school that's out on expeditionary trips, trying to do CMAS, trying to continue to operate through this period of time. So she is very important to that process, and we appreciate her. At RMSEL, this is the time of year where you see an influx of energy and passion and enthusiasm at this place. Basically starts the week prior to spring break and kind of runs every week until the end of the school year, where our kids get to be out on their firsthand expedition learning experiences. Our high school students went out the week before spring break. If you think back to the week before spring break, we were in 10 consecutive weeks of snowfall here in Denver County, and they soldiered on. They went to New Mexico, Arizona. We even had a group here in Colorado. We had to pivot on the day that they were expected to depart. They went a little further south. They had an abbreviated experience, and they got to get out and they got to build community. And it was extremely important for them for that time. Our 6th graders got to go out last week and culminate their experience in Rocky Mountain Western geology in Moab. They had an amazing experience. They did not get winded out like we did here. They came back filled with energy and joy. And next week, I fortunately get to take our 7th and 8th grade students on their Colorado River expedition, where we are talking about the stranded asset of water in the Rocky Mountain West and how it impacts our state of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada, and get to be on the river. We're going to leave from Grand Junction and float over to Utah and Westwater exit ramp. And it'll be a great multi-day experience to have those kids out on the river. Based on that, sorry, I kind of had this memorized, but I think that covered our spring crew trip piece. The next page here is things that we're doing right now, and you're doing them in your districts and your schools, thinking strategically about how to best move forward into a endemic phase of the pandemic period that we've lived in for the last 3 calendar school years. And when we think about school and you think about your districts of K-12, when you really start to analyze the impact of kids, every child has been impacted by this, but most specifically, we have seen the impact to be the most significant for our primary age students who are up to 2nd grade, who have never come to school absent of any type of disruption. And if you think about your experience as a middle school student, you gloss the pandemic over top of that. If you were an 8th grader this year, you have never not gone to school during that development or phase of education with some type of disruption. So we're trying to be very specific next year. As we know, remote instruction was our most challenging for that group of students. We're making a financial decision with the approval of the budget that will go before the board to bring about 2 kindergarten classrooms with the size of 1 to 13. So taking our 26 student classroom size and splitting it into 2 environments to really support those students learning how to come to school. If you've ever swung by a kindergarten classroom right now, going through ECE, going through this period of pandemic, experiencing the stress within the household, the stress on your family members, the stress of potential loss or grief, our youngest students are really struggling. They've also had the infusion of a life with technology in their hands. Oftentimes they respond to environmental stimuli at the pace of an iPad. We watch them in that environment, and breaking their class size down into a smaller space and providing them a 1 to 13 ratio. They will no longer have an educational assistant, so they will be in a 1 to 13 environment. We'll also have 3 associate teachers, which are formerly our educational assistants, when we are going to increase from a part-time position to a full-time position in 1st grade, 2nd and 3rd grade loop, and the 4th, 5th grade loop. And we are going to pay these what is not a livable standard in Denver, but something in increase of what others tend to be able to do at $20 an hour. And we believe it's important to provide them with full medical and health benefits. So those 3 positions will be full-time. They'll be $20 an hour, and they will have health and medical benefits that they previously did not receive as classified employees. We also know that we're going to be filling some gaps of students. We have a phenomenal 0.6 math interventionist who is currently employed. We're increasing our 0.4 literacy intervention to a 1.0 FTE for next year to provide those services to our earliest learners. In middle school, like I said, if you're an 8th grader, you've never not been in middle school during a disrupted period of time. I'm a former middle school teacher by trade. I love middle school. I taught middle school math here last year for a semester, and those are, as I like to say, my people. I'm taking them out on their trip next week, and I believe in them. I believe in their spirit. I believe in their energy, but they're also in a critical period of development. And one thing that we're observing, we're talking about as a school leadership team, as a crew leadership team, along with our technology teachers, the impact of technology on our students. We went through this phase of increasing technology use by the requirement of the pandemic. But what we're observing is that accessibility to technology can be harmful to students and causation force and challenges that they're having. Currently, Common Sense Media just put out their annual report, March 2022. 8 hours and 39 minutes is currently the average entertainment use for a student ages 13 to 18. That does not include Chromebook one-to-one device distribution of schools. So if we think about that with a little bit of basic math, I know our middle school students surprise us every day, but with a school day and 8 hours of sleep, they have managed to successfully travel through time and create longer than a 24-hour day. So if you are interested in how to get additional time, I encourage you upon your departure today to head upstairs, grab a middle school student. They will identify themselves to you without you asking. But it's certainly a concern for us, something that we want to address. We know that working in collaborative groups, speaking to one another, looking into each other in the eyes, using paper-based books and still accessing technology when it is the right tool for the job will be important. But we're working on developing a technology position statement for our school around how we expect technology to be used here in the classroom, because certainly that is an increased amount of time on any one sustained element. We'll also be able to offer middle school immersion to world languages, a course for our kids in middle school next year. It's a course we had to cut at the onset of the pandemic, and we are looking to hire a Spanish teacher for our high school students because we've been using a great partnership with one of our member districts to provide online Spanish instruction, but we know that online instruction can be challenging. Online instruction to learn a foreign language certainly adds another layer, and our kids have asked us if we would consider not doing that anymore. And I think one thing that makes this place special is the integration of those fieldwork experiences where we get kids out once per month, up a minimum of 6 times per year. Some of the other months of August and May present challenger months where we have crew trip, but getting kids out, getting them directly aligned to their experience with experts, getting them out into the community. We connected with our Colorado River expedition. We went to Denver Water at Waterston Canyon. We learned about the watershed to the tap. We connected with the Department of Natural Resources here in Colorado and had their Deputy Attorney General do a Zoom field work with our students to teach about water policy and rights in the Rocky Mountain West and how that water from the Colorado River is utilized in our watershed. So we want to be able to continue giving those students the experience to get out. This also includes things that just lift up spirit in our community. Our 6th graders, when they got back from their Moab trip, they each went and served at the Food Bank of the Rockies. When they got back, they packaged over 1,000 pounds of food, and it just gives them a day to connect and be beyond the classroom and beyond themselves. So good things are happening. A few things here on the final page before I wrap up. Registration, school registration is always busy. School registration at an expeditionary learning school of our nature is challenging because we collect complete medical records on every child, and then our permission to participate in risk acknowledgement statement along with the electronic registration. And we are going to offer an early bird period of time this year in the month of May for parents that would like to come in and complete that process prior to the start of school. It'll give myself as well as our office staff team members, enrollment coordinator, the time to start building our medical spreadsheets in advance. And we would like to do this starting on May 2nd. Next piece, professional development in ground school. We're thinking ahead to next year. We want to provide our teachers ample opportunity to be ready to start. We know that that's important for new staff members. We know that's important for returning staff members. So we will have 2 weeks of professional development that include a RMSEL 101 course, 3-day Upper Colorado River staff retreat, where we go out and live our values as a community here of teachers, 3-day expedition design workshop, and 2 days allocated to classroom work time to lay this foundation of success for our teacher team. And finally, as we conclude this year, I would invite any and all of you, as well as council, to participate if you find the time. I'm sure your schedules are jammed, but this is the culmination of the RMSEL experience each year, which is where each student builds a portfolio and shares their individual story as a learner. That happens with our senior students for the 2 Fridays in May, and then the Saturday in May of the reading day on May 14th. Then we have 2 additional days of presentation. And while I understand you all go to multiple graduations, we somehow pull all of that into one single day from 10th grade through 3rd grade, and then our senior graduation at 4 p.m. So those are my comments. I take any questions, commentary from the board before we continue.
Before we do that, I'd love for our 2 board members to introduce themselves. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Angela RMSEL, School District Board.
Thank you for being here today. And
I'm Michelle Ortiz. I serve on Aurora Public Schools Board of Education.
great. Thank you both for joining. So any comments or questions for Chad from his executive director report? Well, I'd just like to say all of this spring crew trip sounds so exciting. Thank you for your dedication to taking middle schoolers for a week. I also share your middle school heart. I know how exciting that is and also can be a little challenging, but I think that's what makes RMSEL so exciting. So, and I look forward to attending the graduations. I know we're working on getting calendar invites to all the board out that we had asked to have those held on our calendar so we can go. Because RMSEL's graduation, for those of you, if you've never experienced it, it's one of the most meaningful graduations I've ever attended. Every student gets a 5 to 7 minute speech, right, about them from their teacher, and it's very, very moving. I highly encourage you, if you've never done that, to be able to do that. So, any other questions or comments? Brianna.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I just wanted to express my gratitude and just support for how you've adjusted the primary age classrooms. As a former kindergarten teacher, I just really appreciate the attentiveness that you and your staff are just putting towards kindergarten students in particular. It is this has been a really, really intense couple of years. And I truly believe that you're setting everyone up for success by adjusting those classroom sizes. So thanks, Chad, and your staff for making that happen.
I concur, Brianna. That was another note I had. I got all excited when I heard about the trips, but I agree. Supporting our youngest learners early is important. Thank you.
And I'll just comment on that. We're very fortunate with the BEST grant renovations to the campus, all the new things you see in this particular room. In addition, the 2 kindergarten classrooms will have internal restrooms for those students. And then first grade will be here in this room. So they will have accessibility very quickly as well. If you know anything about primary age kids, that adds a layer of challenge to the teacher. So when the restroom is in the classroom, it's very helpful.
Yeah, very good. Yes. Especially after the pandemic, I've learned I have some friends who are EC and kindergarten teachers, and that is even more important. So thank you. Any other comments or questions before we move on to our next agenda item? Well, thank you again, Chad, for the thoroughness and all the detail and all that you do. So thank you. Our next agenda item is open forum. Do we have anyone signed up for open forum?
No one signed up in advance.
Okay. Nobody signed up in advance, so we don't have anyone for open forum. So we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion to move the consent agenda.
Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye.
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 And all those in favor say nay. All right, motion passes. Thank you. We will move on to the discussion item of the intergovernmental agreement, and I will turn that over to Chad.
Well, I will turn that over in conjunction with Coulter Bump, our legal counsel from Kaplan and Ernst, who brought all of us together in this process to complete this in a timely manner to bring about commentary revisions to this continued partnership. We have given all districts the opportunity to weigh in to revisions to the intergovernmental agreement contract. They had a period of time of 1 month to do that. Coulter and I then had the opportunities to synthesize those comments into a memo of council describing each impact of the requested revisions, things that seem to have no operational impact, things that may have operational impact to how RMSEL continues to operate and functions and continues to thrive in this unique partnership. So I'll turn it over to you for any comments, and then we can get started with.
Yeah, well, obviously, I have to thank all of you for the time that you devoted to this. It has not been easy managing 2 levels of boards or public boards, and so I know that it wouldn't have been possible without your participation and support, and certainly your ongoing support. I think that this process wouldn't have also, coming today with the synthesized comments was important to Chad and I, because we didn't want to spend all day here. We have 2 hours, and there are, I think, what we've identified are just a couple of things that we can kind of hash out, but I also want to acknowledge some of the conversations I've had with each of you. Obviously haven't had the privilege yet to speak to some of you board members, new ones, faces I don't recognize, but council in discussing some of the terms that we've revised or are planning to revise. I think there may still also be some conversations that can be had about, while we're renewing, what are the other things that we could do to improve these conversations for the future. And I know, for example, one of the it's not disputed, but one of the terms on the table is how long do they want this agreement to renew? And I think that kind of couples also with, how do we want this, maybe even what this board looks like. If it is a consideration for us to make participation in RMSEL business more efficient or more, I don't even know, if there's another way that we could contemplate each of your, engagement and the time that you're devoting to RMSEL, we would certainly welcome those discussions as well. But aside from those things that have not been specifically identified, I think what I'd asked Chad to do, and I hope it was or will be helpful to hear a little bit more about the entity itself. I think for me, and especially when Steve was the last conversation I had about this, and he asked some really good questions. I don't know the answer to that. So of course, I think Chad is the one in the room with the most institutional knowledge about RMSEL. Obviously, an entity that's been around for years. But Julie,
We all look at Julie.
And thank you, Julie, of course, for being here and serving. And to correct Chad where he gets, follows the wrong channel. But I thought it would be useful for us all to hear a little bit more about that historical kind of how RMSEL started and how it evolved. And I think we've heard from his executive director report what the school's currently doing, so that's fantastic. But also for Julie to present on financials. I don't know whether council has had the opportunity, and I wouldn't expect any of you board members to have educated them on some of the details that Julie keeps well managed during the school year or fiscal year, and then the next probably then diving in with that kind of framework, diving into some of the issues that came up in our revisions and the memo that surfaced between. So Chad, if you don't mind, take what time you think you need to address each of those topics.
So I will be as concise as I can, which is challenging for my decade of experience here for the 3 decades that this institution and partnership has been in place. And so I'll begin with, there's a great executive summary included in the memo that you have, and I'm going to use that to try to capture the uniqueness of RMSEL and what this place is. In the 1992-93 school year, a group of innovators came together with previous members of your partner districts to form an expeditionary learning school of choice in the Denver metro community that served across this large geographic region, ranging from Roxborough and Douglas County to North Denver, to Aurora, to Littleton, to Cherry Creek. And this partnership has been something that's thrived. I understand it is unique. I understand that it's dynamic. I understand that it is one of 3 Board of Cooperative Education Services in the state operating schools. The other 2 are digital BOCES or special education site-based center-provided places in Colorado Springs. But this came apart as a part of the New American Schools Development Corporation to break the mold. And I think you should contribute success to those members of your districts, your previous superintendents, your previous board members, your previous students and community members who took that opportunity to provide an educational opportunity to students in the metro area. I say educational opportunity because we are not an institution that tries to compete with any of our 5 districts. We don't have an advertising budget in our school-based budgeting dollars. We don't disseminate funds to compete in what has become a conversation of competitiveness of charters and choice and vouchers and all of these pieces. We have simply been here to provide an alternative learning experience that works for some students, and some students thrive in that. I think many of your schools provide pathways, other opportunities for choice. DSST does technology better than I do. And if I went to DSST and said, do you want to take 104 middle school students on an overnight river experience without any exit from the canyon? They might say, no, we would like you to continue to do that. And I think that's important because someone at some point in time prior to me recognized that our antiquated industrialized system is built on how old you are, not how you synthesize information and not how you best learn. And I think we're getting better at that. But we know that not every 5-year-old's the same just because they're 5. We know that some 5-year-olds thrive in an environment that is more structured, that is more linear, that has different opportunities, and some students thrive in this expeditionary setting. And so I just say that because that's what this BOCES provides to these community members, these stakeholders, these our families and students. I think in that, A few things to capitalize on is the success of this organization. This is a school district as recognized as a BOCES, accredited with distinction, meaning that kids are performing academically here. And not only are they performing academically, to meet that standard, they also have to be measuring growth when finalizing that school accreditation report. So not only are our kids growing that need to catch up, our kids that are achieving are achieving. And this is a great place to provide that option to families and community. You all have come to build relationships with me over time, whether that's council, whether that's board members, whether that's previous board members. I hope that I work in the capacity of a leader in the best interest of our kids. I've been here. I care about them. I care about our stakeholders. I care about our community. When you get the opportunity, when you leave, make sure to turn right. I think the BEST grant is an example that we understand our uniqueness. We understand some of the limitations of our uniqueness, and we work well within those limitations of uniqueness because we didn't have the opportunity to have the ability to go out and tax our community base for a bond and budget to build a campus. And so we used other alternatives at our disposal, and we are fortunate to have received that BEST grant in partnership with Denver Public Schools, who is the property owner of which we did the property investment into. I would say parents and community members love this place. We have an 86% retention rate when you look at students K-12. Most of our attrition is at the 8th grade level. If you take 8th grade out, we have a 95% retention rate. So 95 out of 100 families are coming back next year. If they're not in that 8th grade, go to a different high school choice option. I'd say things that are paramount to our success is our staff responded to the TEL survey results that 100% of them feel that this is a good place to work. And 100% or 93.3% of the RMSEL parent community indicated that they strongly agree that their child enjoys attending school. So you have a strong base of stakeholders and community, children, staff, and family that want to be here. I commend this board for continuing to be innovative and making sure that we meet the equitable outcomes of our mission, vision, and our strategic plan. Carrie was on the board when we conducted an equity audit with a third party, Miss Massey, who found that we had access opportunities, we had high achievement, we had accessibility, we had opportunity, and we did not have disproportionate discipline taking place here at our school. So I think the health and wellness of this institution is thriving, and I think it is in a place for you as board members and the clients to come together and figure out a way for this continuation to happen.
Thank you, Jeff. Julie, not to put you on the spot.
That's okay. Holter via chat asked me to kind of prepare just kind of tell you how the school is funded. We received all of our funding from BPS. They pay it to us basically on a monthly basis. We get the first 25% of that in July. Our funding is based on our, just like everyone else, the prior year student count, so on October 1st. Any adjustments that happen to that funding usually come through in February, March of the new year. The cost for DPS to provide sped services to us is about $360. Part of that is the sped service charge, and part of it is for the psychologist, psychologist, sociologist, and nurse, school nurse. For us to utilize the Infinite Campus, which is a student management system like SASE, probably in other districts or Power School, that costs us $18.45 per student. And we're charged all these fees on all of our students. So all 400 students, even though we have a, I don't know, 17% of that is actually receiving sped charges, receiving sped services. We do not receive any mill levy override monies. Because it's a partnership with 5 districts, that would entail going to each district for the MLO monies. And we're not eligible to do that. We do receive roughly $200,000 a year from CDE to be a BOCES. We receive some of our funding as well from parents, and parents subsidize the funding for transportation, instructional supplies, and technology. In addition, our entire adventure program, all the crew trips that Chad talked about, that's all paid by parent fees. Those fees range from $1,044 to $1,414, depending on the age of the student and the grade they're in. The total amount of fees that we take in each year is about 472,000. In addition to transportation, supplies, technology, and the field work, 12% of those student fees go to cover financial aid for all of our students who need that. So we're never turning away a child because they can't stay. We lease this building, as Chad kind of spoke about, from DPS at an annual cost of $150,000. That's got a 1% escalator in the lease starting in next fall, 2022. What else? Debt service on our bond that Chad spoke about. So we received roughly $4 million from CDE via the BEST program, and we had to go out and find a private equity bond to do the match to it, because we couldn't be matched. All of our districts, because they're separate districts, we couldn't rely on one of them to meet the match. So our match is pretty hefty at 62%. So we had to raise $7.3 million. We paid 100 of that down. We have annually the maximum amount of debt service is $484,500, and the bond, the structure of the bond and the repayment mirrors the school lease, so it's 30 years out to pay that bond. And the remainder of the budget is allocated to salaries and student supplies, facility, and G&A expenses. So that's roughly where it comes and where it goes.
So I took the opportunity to break that down a little further because I know it's something we're going to discuss today, and I actually have somewhere in my piles of supplemental. No. Okay. 1 to 2 sided. Save the environment a little bit there. This, if you turn to the second page, Julie spoke to the fee structure in her kind of financial synopsis there. I wanted to hit on a couple things of how that fee breaks apart, because I know it's something that we'll be discussing today. Where those fees are collected, where they're allocated to, it's on the back page of that. Sorry there, fieldwork fee there, bold kind of center. 5th grade, 6th through 8th, 9th through 12th, that's how we collect those. We collect an instructional support fee, we collect the technology fee and the transportation fee. So that's what makes up those fee totals that she spoke to. Want to just share how those things are allocated out in the annual budget. We collect $120,510 a year, $120,000 roughly a year for instructional support fees. We spend $234,000 on that, which is directly allocated to every teacher. So teachers at RMSEL have an individual supply budget to operate their classroom. So that is a budget that is a line item that passes through to the teacher so that they don't have to go into their pocket, so that they have the accessibility to have resources, to do science labs, to pivot, to purchase textbooks, to align to their expedition of study. When we decided to study the Colorado River this year because we were unable to go on our civil rights expedition to Memphis, Birmingham, and Little Rock with the COVID restrictions, we had to purchase a book on the fly. So we purchased the Emerald Mile, which is a narrative historical text about the river system and the fastest run through the river. So that's where those dollars go. As you can see, we're not collecting a full fee to fund that in its entirety. It was an offset conversation in December of 2018 of the BOCES to make that decision for those fees to offset us to provide our debt service. The second piece in there, a technology fee, pretty straightforward, access to technology for students. Transportation fee, that was a recommendation of the board of our district accountability committee, PAC, because we were using our fundraising dollars kind of every year to buy school buses. And the group said, is there any way we could just collect that a little bit differently, because parents are supportive of continuing to purchase buses to continue to operate the program. But those 8 buses that you see out there, we replace one of those every other year because those buses are approximately $65,000 and we collect half of that each year. So we replace a bus every 2 years. And if you look at that fee structure is how we break this down into funding. 12% of that goes to financial aid. 10% goes to that landmark trip allocation. What that is when we take a big trip, like sailing to Catalina, like our civil rights expedition, like our Yellowstone trip, we don't come to our parents in that given year and say, oh, this is the year it's $3,000 to go on the trip. Students in that grade level are paying that 10% allocation towards that every year to participate in those programmatic aspects of what we do here. I think from a lens of opportunity, access, and equitability for kids, I think one thing that's unique about RMSEL that is a bit different from other schools of larger sizes, every student participates in everything that we do here. And so every student participates in every trip, field work, class, course. There isn't this leveled system. There isn't this breakout. There aren't these opportunities for a kid to not participate. So I think that's a huge aspect of this structure. Make sure that students that can arrive at RMSEL, that is the barrier to attendance here at our school, is getting from Roxborough to RMSEL, or getting from North Denver to RMSEL, or Southeast Aurora. The opportunities to attend. 1% goes to liability insurance, 5.2% goes to operational expenses around the buses, tires, repairs, belts, windows, gaskets, thermostats. Yeah, we did lose all 8 of those in a theft last year. Teacher planning day gives the teachers to plan for these experiences, because we know being a teacher is a challenging job. Being a teacher and taking kids on these experiences needs a little bit of extra time. I will say, as you look at fee structures across other schools, everybody does this uniquely and different. One thing you will notice in our fee structure is we do not have a structure that includes any salaries. So we don't pay our adventure coordinator or others or other employees from this lump sum. So I hope that helps with how that fee structure is broken down. Yeah.
I know the last number I believe you gave us was 16 students, 8 full-time, 8 part-time on financial aid. Is that still an accurate number? Close. Close to it.
Unpack that for the rest of us.
So our financial aid is based on the FDA's income eligibility guidelines for poverty. We take those straight from the federal government, U.S. Department of Agriculture is where they come in. We go through and use that same table roughly in our financial aid application. So anyone who wants to apply can apply. I need your most recent year's tax return, look at your adjusted gross income, and you either get awarded financial aid or you do not. We do have every year some families who are the $90,000 to $125,000 range to apply for financial aid, and they don't receive it because it's a constant for everyone. Doesn't matter. We did award some financial aid, I would say January or February. We look at a mid-year. So if you have a family who's applied, we had one that applied for partial financial or for financial aid, they were awarded partial, but during the pandemic, the income in the house stayed the same, but the number of people in the house changed. And so we took that to our administrative team, talked about it, and awarded them the other half of the financial aid. You have specific questions about?
No, I just wanted to see if those numbers were still about.
They're still
the last time. Yes, thank you.
It's roughly the same every year.
I had a question to piggyback on that. So is there like a certain dollar amount that has to be divided, or is there slots that or when you're dispersed, when you're, in terms of how far the money will go, is about how many?
12% of the money collected in fees goes to a financial aid. So it goes into a separate bucket that's awarded. In the past couple of years, we've had money left over in that bucket. To be honest with you. I mean, and when we get to the supplemental budget, there's figures in there that you can see how it's calculated and everything.
Okay. Thank you.
We don't turn anything away.
Yeah, go ahead.
I guess who verifies your bond rating? Moody's did. And so what was that based upon? Was that just, I guess my understanding of bond ratings for public projects is that they look at the entire area. So was the consideration for all the involved districts or just the zip code, or how did that work?
All all the zip codes that are involved with the students that come here.
Okay.
And they flew out here from Chicago and San Francisco and spent 3 or 4 hours with us.
And what was the rating that you picked when you did some
BA2,
PA1.
BA1.
A1?
That was we can go back to the executive summaries of that and provide that to anybody that needs it. That was based on longevity of the school, as well as our ability to service debt based on what we had in the reserve at the time. And then our partnership for default with the leasehold extension. Whereas if we are to default on that leasehold extension, Denver Public Schools owns the building and provides the bondholders the option to release the facility to a partner of choice between DPS and the bondholders, or for DPS to assume ownership and service that debt accordingly. So it was a 3-layered kind of approach to that rating that got us there.
Now, is that, I would like to, is that report available? So I'm curious how they, particularly when, for the districts involved, our participation is optional. And so, and then we don't have the ability to tax. And so I'm not sure how, I'm just curious how they arrived at that. And I'm not against it. I just,
Sure.
again, I want to understand, you know, how this is funded and how the ratings are arrived. Just, you know, be a steward of public dollars and make sure that that's just to understand how they do that. Because again, not being able to tax and then our optional involvement makes me nervous when you start racking up those bills.
Jack, wasn't enrollment also a consideration?
Enrollment history was a consideration. We have to do an annual report to SECFA and Moody's annually, which is similar to the report that our board members received, as well as district staff. It's basically a 10-year synopsis of enrolled students. They look at enrolled students, they look at the number of students that are currently on the wait list, and they look at that, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, they want to see that total to be very strong. And so it ranging from 368.5 to as high as 392 or no, 397, and we're currently at 393 with projected around 402 for next year, which will probably come in closer to that 390-ish figure. But I can send those documents along.
Then you also mentioned that you said you don't generate people, but then you said when people ask for it in the $90,000 to $120,000 range, those ranges are declined. Yes. And is that, well, because, and I know the federal income guidelines, but again, in a metro area like Denver, where I've heard this is last week that the average housing price is $750K. 90,000 is not, that may be a lot of money, maybe like in Kansas City or maybe even on the Western Slope, but in the Denver metro area, 90 to 100,000, you're not, as the kids say, balling out of control. And particularly if they have multiple children. So is that, I think that needs to be reassessed and look at all those things. Because if you're 90,000 in an apartment, you know, yeah, that's a little bit different than, you know, I think we need to look at our cost of living and inflation and all those sorts of things when we're assessing that. And so I totally respect the federal guidelines, and that may work in some communities, but yeah.
And I hear where you're adjusting for the pandemic, like you said, like mid-year, you're going back in. And I think we as a board could help look through that with Chad and think, how can we look at how we're allocating financial aid based, given some of these things that have happened, and, you know, like now housing prices in Denver are crazy. People's situations are changing so quickly. How can we make sure that the money that you've so carefully set aside is actually getting out to all the families who need it, given people's fluid situations in their work and employment histories now? So
Plus that federal poverty rate. I'll be careful how I say this, but you know, the feds are slow to react to the needs of inflation and the changes that we see happening, especially in Colorado. So that would be something else to consider. I don't know if there's wiggle room in what metrics is used to qualify families, but right, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Yeah.
And to Angela's example, right, to St. Louis to Denver,
Right.
Colorado, that there's no apple, it's comparing apples to oranges. So.
And I respect everybody's perspective on that. And I encourage you as board members, council, stewards, community to understand where our PPR dollar is as compared to those comparative communities. And we want, I say it all the time. You've heard me say it in open house. You've heard me say it here. I want to be Bloomington, Indiana. Sorry if you're from Bloomington, but 12.5 would be great. And it would create many other opportunities and options that are limited in Colorado public schools. And this fee pays for these experiences only, because we don't go to that PPR number and pay for this in addition to, with absent of, as Julie spoke to MLO, we're working on finite constraints within our system and our system at large. So certainly respect that if Tabor and Gallagher somehow make their way through and we adjust and we become, I respectfully, I'm okay with just being Bloomington. Being a Cincinnati kid, I can be okay with 12.5 versus the 9 that we get. I think that's something realistic that we have to take into consideration and respect as well in this conversation.
Is there a discretionary procedure? I guess what I'm understanding, maybe misunderstood before, is that there's just an application for within the federal guidelines, but there's not an internal discretionary committee that reviews and makes an allocation based on merit rather than just direct need based on federal guidelines.
Correct.
No.
Okay.
Unless there is something like the family that came up at the end of the year, I take that to our administrative team. So,
but the fees are paid before school start. I mean, at the beginning of the school year, correct?
in January, when students are committing for the next year,
Oh, got
there's
you.
a $300 commitment.
Okay.
That goes to these fees. So when it comes to registration this year in May and July, half of whatever their fees are due then, and the remainder is due by November 30th. We have about 6-7 families that are making payments all year long.
Okay.
They do that so they're ahead of the game. We have multiple families that have paid the entirety of next year in addition to this year. We work with everyone. So whether it's making payments monthly or things like that.
And then the second question I had was the money that I think you mentioned that there has been a balance. You've been able to, you haven't paid it out every year. And what is that? I mean, does that balance just, I would assume it just
It
keeps
rolls to the general fund.
Okay.
That's where it goes if it's unused.
Do you have a general sense of what the average amount is that's remaining in this year?
I don't. The pandemic hasn't helped.
Yeah.
It seems like we've had less people during the pandemic applying for financial aid than there were before the pandemic. And I know some of that is a stimulus money, but there's been a big drop in it. So it'll be interesting next year when we see what it looks like.
But we could assume that there is some sort of balance that's rolling over every year to the general fund.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Last year, I think it was like 14,000. Right now, it's
Okay.
off the top of my head,
No,
40,000.
that's helpful.
What'd you say?
That's helpful. Thank you.
It's in the other documents you have.
Could you talk a little bit about how families learn about the fees and the waiver process and the student aid? I'm just doing looking on the website here and the FAQs, and let's say I give us about 3 minutes, but would love to know kind of how parents learn about it and learn about
Sure.
the the options?
So we host, our only outreach is absent of any cost. It's digital and in-person open houses that we host here at school. Those have been digital for the past 2 years, in person in the past. We share that as a part of our slide deck with families during that time. When families go through the lottery process and are awarded a spot, they receive a letter of acceptance from Chris that outlines all the materials that you need, and it includes information about financial aid specifically in there and how to access that. And then to respect families needing to receive that award, Julie does one-to-one meetings with those families prior to registration opening to help them complete all of their paperwork, to help them find the documents that they may be absent of. And then we remind folks in October to go ahead and apply for that if you missed it before your second payment in November is due.
I just wanted to say, so Chris, as people are applying for the coming year, she's keeping a list of who's interested in financial aid from new students. And actually financial aid is happening today, so she's going to end up mailing those individual families the financial aid application. And then it also goes on the website. And the fees you asked about, when they receive the letter and they commit, the fees are all listed in there. Sign that form, they know what they are.
Very good, thank you. No other questions then on those two items. The plan would be then to dig in on some of these issues. Although frankly, this is very helpful to some of these we're just talking about anyway. It seems to me that what Chad and I tried to do with the synthesized memo was just to kind of distill down for you what some requests that have been made and how we can accommodate those without any or very little effort. One of the things that I think was pretty obvious were policies. And they're requesting that we adopt more policies that either are within the DPS fleet, but I think the conversation could be broader than that to what CASB or BOCES policies are there that we may or may not have in our policy manual. From my work with the district, or I'm so used to saying that with RMSEL, we adopted the J policies sort of in response to a disciplinary circumstance that we had where we were trying to figure out how to discipline a student or two students, and I mentioned this case in our memo, had to discipline two students for the same conduct from different school districts. And so we found ourselves in a mess. So, we need to have policies that are going to treat our students fairly, because obviously their circumstances here is what makes them equivalent, not necessarily what would happen to them if they returned to their resident districts. And so we developed and adopted pretty much all of the J policies at that time. And we also adopted some of the K policies concerning complaints, concerns, grievances. You all are familiar with those, to be sure that parents had an opportunity or others who had concerns to file and seek some sort of remedy from the school of any of their grievances, and more so it's been complaints, I'd say. We also have revised and updated the AC policies. Obviously, you all in your member districts have that obligation as well. And so that was something that those were sort of the easy low-hanging fruits. I would say we probably haven't gone through CASB's policies that are relevant to all of you that may not always be relevant to us, to see whether there are others that would be nice to have on the record, so to speak. And so I think the DPS suggestion that we look at some other policies didn't go unvolunteered. We're willing to consider them. And I think that, as I've explained in the memo, there are some that don't change our operations. Of course, there are some others that may not make sense because we don't have, they're not relevant necessarily. But I do believe that it was clear from the suggestions from your team, Carrie, that there's an understanding on your end on that, and those policies may or may not be waived, so to speak. It's a weird way of looking at it because this is not a charter school consideration, but that would be a word that we would use. And so I thought that would open up the discussion other than the policies and some of the operational things. Chad, if there were any in the meat of the memo that we need to address. Otherwise, it would be my purpose and intention to all of you to adopt those changes and as I put together the revised IGA and tell you what we're going to implement. I think that that's fair. And if, as you are reviewing this, you think of others, we can certainly consider that today or beyond today's discussion. But that leaves us with what I think are three, I'm adding one for your discussion, for your consideration, and some of you already know this. Three sort of remaining issues that,
Can we just stop with the
Yeah.
policy for a second?
Yeah, of
before we move
course.
on? Our perspective on this is I think that all of these can be considered, but I think that RMSEL as a whole should have some flexibility. So I would not be interested in revising the IGA to say that, yes, RMSEL is absolutely going to adopt every single policy that is on DPS's list. I think that RMSEL needs to go through and assess each individual one and determine if it's appropriate for their operations, and it may or may not be appropriate for their operations. If it is, then I think that the board can decide, is this policy appropriate? But I would not like to see an absolute commitment that, yes, we're absolutely going to adopt a policy in this area. I think what's fair is we will consider DPS's request to adopt policies in these areas.
and to your point, we did review this policy and went through and tried in that memo to show you where we thought there were gonna be some operational glitches and where they were not relevant to our.
And that's why I
circumstances.
want to have that
Yeah.
flexibility in the language.
Yeah. So do you want to have a full length discussion on that? I will entertain anything that the members believe is necessary.
I don't know that we need a full length discussion. I just want flexibility in the
Sure.
language that RMSEL will consider the proposed policies. And I don't think, I mean, if we go through every one of these policies today, we're gonna be. here
No,
all
I
day.
agree. I would rather go to some other things than each of the policies to your point.
So Coulter, is it reasoned synopsis to that when you created this, or we created this in collective as a response, we looked specifically at policies that we said, absolutely, this is in agreement with the contractual outlines of the IGA. So we have a few contractual agreements with our partner with Denver Public Schools that would behold us to adopting a policy. So for example, when they speak to facility policies in here, this is their facility. So we lease that from them as a leasee. So it, somebody's gonna have to fix me on that language, but it doesn't make operational sense for us to be in any type of objection with that when it's their facility. We have to maintain it to their standards. We have to work with their teams because they are the property owner. I think the same thing applies in other areas of which we contract with. Specifically, they are our LEA for special education. And so therefore we can't adopt special education policies that would be alternative to that of their district. I think I'm speaking really quickly about the J policies and about others that we could adopt of this board in collaboration with CASB to meet the requirements as requested, really stemmed from an issue where as this organization has evolved over time, we used to not be an expulsionary authority as a building. We went back to our district. So if two kids in high school decided to make a poor decision that would bring them forward to an expulsion hearing, those expulsion hearings were being effectively run in two silos, of which a kid could get an alternative outcome, not equitable to. And so that was the reason for this being created internally, to make sure that kids have the same application of policy across the board. So that's a brief background and a brief, I believe, synopsis of summary of there are absolutely policies that we should adopt due to our contractual arrangement with our partner in Denver Public Schools. And there are ones where I agree with Sonia's commentary around maybe creating some flexibility.
I just have a question. Could you identify which contract you're referring to when you say the contract?
Two contracts, I would say, is the IGA being a contract, which outlines in articles numbered like for special education, and then the lease,
Yeah.
and then the lease, the lease
And
agreement.
there isn't any contract with DBS with respect to the relationship for them to be the LEA.
That's this, right?
Yeah,
That's article,
and it's always been that way, right?
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Right.
Article 23, students with disabilities.
Mhm. I also want to just take a second to, share a huge thank you to all the work that went into reviewing these policies. I know how much work that is to go through each one, because I don't know if it's fair to say, please adopt our policies, and then you did the work to decide what makes sense for RMSEL. And just want to honor your analysis there and calling out what really does make sense for RMSEL and what doesn't, so that it's not a blanket adoption at all, but really focusing on where that does make sense. So thank you for doing that work.
So just for clarity, and I guess, and also keeping in mind protecting student anonymity and, their confidentiality. So some students that made some poor choices, they were from different districts, and you all didn't have the authority to suspend or expel. Is that what you're saying?
We have the authority to suspend, but then we were working in partnership with the districts to run that expulsionary process independent of us, because I can't be suspension officer and expulsion officer. And so we were leaning into that expulsion hearing process happening at the district. But if two kids, like if a Cherry Creek student and a Denver student were involved, they had not two different processes because the processes were the same, but the hearing officer could have made a decision for alternative outcomes for each of that child. So at that time, Coulter drafted in work with RMSEL to the board to approve a suspension policy, which is active and functioning, where in the event that we suspend now, we go to an independent hearing of which we hire someone to run. I'm not involved in that process. I get to uphold the decision of that independent hearing officer and then bring that to the board in the event that there's an appeal. So that's kind of rough synopsis of how we work. So our directors that work under me handle all discipline up to that point, to keep me independent, to be able to make that independent decision.
And just, I mean, obviously council's aware of this, but the board members that may not be aware, I mean, BOCES is a different operable entity. I mean, we don't have to apply TECTA and other things that may affect our staff members. And so it made sense for us to look at the J policies because we do have a similar student body, but we don't treat our staff necessarily the same. And so we didn't even look at the G policies, just sort of
We have a suite of
sideline those. We have our own, I mean, we didn't look at CASBs and adopt them without, any consideration of our own business matters. We were a little bit more picky, I think you could say, when we were doing that. So, yeah, and I think many of these are, at least in the J fleet that DPS has suggested for adoption, some of them may just be easy for us because they're already there, or, they're stating the expectations, legal requirements that, for equal educational opportunities, for example, that I don't think the RMSEL board would disagree. But I would like to do that. And so does anybody have any suggestions to me on how I can help us get to that next step through the policy issue?
Well, I know I reviewed all the stuff. My kids didn't get Easter baskets, so.
Thank you.
But I guess for me, I would feel more comfortable if we kind of table this and allow us to to look at,
Sure,
what experiences our respective students are having, at the school as it relates to what we expect as a district for Cherry Creek. And then, if we send our students here, what does their experience look like, and make sure that those policies align.
Okay.
I don't feel comfortable doing that in a 30-day period. And so, and I know, well, I say 30 days, but I know we got the information in March and the time frame and whatever. And so I don't know, 6 to 12 months to review all of this stuff. I know policy work can get really deep and bogged down, and in addition to having to do real life at a district, that can be a lot. But I just want, and I know for us as a board, we're going through a lot of transitions. Want to make sure that all of those things align. We are looking at our policies as well, and so just want to make sure that all of those things are able to marry and to come up with something. And so I know in speaking with my council here and just the other board members, if we could just kind of continue as is, and then but knowing that this time next year, where we'll go within the few months, we want to have all of this read and adjusted and actually mull through, because I know sometimes we don't know about if a policy is good or bad until, in this instance, where something happens where, and I don't think it's fair to the students. I don't think it's fair to the families to kind of be in limbo because you don't have it, you haven't reviewed all the possibilities that may happen within the operation of a school or the school day in general.
so maybe the suggestion is that we have at least a base requirement in the IG that requires the board to review policies.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think Chad's already mentioned, like the facility policy. I mean, that seems appropriate to me, given that this is a TPS facility and that you lease it back from them. And so I think as sort of a game plan, long vision, but I think you start with those that probably are less controversial. And that, yeah, we do need to think about those. And so start drafting some policies and propose them to the board and go through your normal recall practice for those policies. And then start working on the ones where folks may say, I'm not sure if this is a policy that we need or don't need. And it's hard for me, the list is long to say, go through every single one and say, yeah, they definitely need it. And then I think the members can have more robust discussion. Yes, can articulate why they think that a particular policy needs to be looked at, and others can consider those things.
So the suggestion would be that we at least tackle, and I don't know how to, I mean, you all are used to doing policies on a renewal basis where things have changed in the law and then the new policy has been brought to you. Of course, when you have no policies, it's a totally different circumstance, or at least fewer policies. Would we commit ourselves to, or do I hear a suggestion that we're committing ourselves to a certain number of policies to review every year? Or that every year we will review policies as you are all used to doing at the time of year that it makes most sense. I think June tends to be the policy time period. In which case we could commit in the IGA, the policy paragraph that says that RMSEL, the board will review new policies annually. And that way we can prepare you so that you have time to review them and adopt them as necessary.
I suggest maybe a revision to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, this is kind of a DPS request. I think, I'm gonna speak for everybody else. Everybody else is just kind of RMSEL creates its own policies. It's the DPS request. So I want to see what DPS, what flexibility DPS.
Sure.
Appreciate that. I appreciate that. I recognize exactly what you're saying. Digging into all of these, I probably don't even have my head wrapped around all of them. But I also know that getting policies into place is incredibly hard unless you have some momentum. And that sometimes it's easier to get some things in place and then tinker with what you've got. I know you did a lot of work to go through all of these and decide this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. Because you've done that work, I want to honor that and maybe propose that you've done the review and you think these are okay for RMSEL, that you put those in place and then you have an annual review process to say, is this consistent with what the board wants going forward? Are you seeing any problems with these policies? I honestly think most of them are not going to be things that ever hit your radar as problematic. They're just policies that are ensuring consistency between what we see in other DPS schools, both charter and district, but also consistent with the operational functions of RMSEL.
I mean, that's not how I read this report, that Coulter is saying, yes, all, I mean, and I didn't count the whole number, but it's like 20 policies. I don't think that RMSEL is saying all 20 of those are applicable. So
No, I don't think so.
I would not be supportive of a position where RMSEL just adopts them and then has to go back and modify them. Because from my perspective, trying to fix a problem after you've already adopted a policy is not good policy making practice.
I agree. No, I'm suggesting the ones that they already said they're okay with. That's what the board would store it with.
And I would be okay with that, but that wasn't clear.
Okay.
So the language in the, I mean, again, we're working on a governance document, so we want to be sure it is generic, not necessarily saying, and RMSEL will adopt these policies, but I think I can say that the RMSEL shall annually undertake a review of its policies, period. And that at this annual review, obviously, we would propose to you the policies that have been suggested by, some of the policies that have been suggested by DPS that we believe we can implement, and allow the RMSEL board to decide whether they're willing to implement them by their vote. Would that be appropriate for everyone? And that would not be this meeting.
Sorry.
No, I apologize.
When you say annual, is that, I guess, the policy of the board to only adopt policies annually, or is it?
I think to undertake a review, to me, would suggest that we're obligating ourselves to look at it, even if none of the policies change, which they do. And we are always in touch when we have to revise them. And like you do, we revise them if necessary before the annual review. But I think committing ourselves to look at them every year may do what some of you are doing right now, freshen up, may require us to freshen up our policies that are our maybe elective policies also.
So quickly to give some quantity to this, to operational pieces, and I'm just blessed to have a great team of people that got behind me when I decided to be a team of 3 to do the best grant. Like, we can do this. I mean, if I look at this, to be respectful, go to this first list, there's 10 right off the bat that are accepted because they're contractual pieces: building safety, security, facility allocation, naming of facilities. Those are all quick emergency management. Then you go down to 9 here, you look at JBR1, that's got to be their policy, is serving in the LEA. And then if you itemize those out, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 policies, of which most of those are already in practice right now in RJ policies. And this could be a relatively streamlined process to meet the request of everyone without, I mean, I think it could happen
I think that's very.
reasonably.
But the difference is that the IGA won't call out these policies
Okay.
as
Yep.
referring back to DPS, and it's gonna make them, it's gonna make our expectation as members to do a policy review. And that this year, we're reviewing the policies that DPS has suggested. There may be policies recommended by other districts in future years, and that would be the same process that the board would consider.
But I guess for me, I think that that's problematic in the sense that it's your turn, next year's our turn. It's your.
No,
I
no,
think that's-
yeah.
I mean, I know,
Anytime.
I know it's not what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
But I think, again, for me, good policy is, you know, we all represent different districts, and that's the nature of this beast right now. And so that we are all able to come in, you know, look at our respective districts and then massage policy that makes that, because again, I don't want to send children home from Cherry Creek and it's like, well, this is kind of based more on what DPS did, and let's switch this so this doesn't happen again. Like, I don't want to put children particularly in a position of being harmed because we didn't do our due diligence. And if we've been functioning like this for 29 years, what is the hurry now? And so recognizing that we have, you know, we obviously we have to tighten things up. I respect that process. And I think if we're going to do it, I think we need to do it to make sure that we are all in agreement and all in alignment with what we expect from our respective districts, and that we can send children here in confidence and say, and again, I'm not saying anything is happening. I don't want to, you know, create that vibe or imply that something nefarious has happened. But far too often, you know, I find that, again, when it relates to children, we're willing to harm them first and fix it later. And I'm tired of that. I think we ought to do our due diligence now and then come back together and say, this is what we need and this is what's best.
And I propose kind of a with the baby with like, because I really haven't heard that line for DPS of what is and is not acceptable. I'm gonna throw this out here because it seems like the two issues are facilities and special education, because DPS has a very large role in facilities and special education. Would you language to the effect that Windsor will adopt DPS policies with regard to facilities and special education, and that anyone that way DPS gets the ones for the 2 areas that are really like the most concerned about that we want. But then the rest of it is just open to this board doing its job to write policies for this. Would that be something to consider?
What was on, I appreciate that, Brandon. On the list, what you were saying is the, you know, the kind of 10, 12 things that you think could be really streamlined and easily adopted from your perspective? Which one was that?
So I went through the non-waivable list. That's the one I was looking at first, and then I flipped over to the waivables. School performance framework, we report to CDE, so that's an easy policy to have in place and to write,
Can you
to
give
adopt.
us some letters and numbers?
Oh, sorry, AB.
Sorry.
Yes.
I'm working from this red line list from alphabet down.
That's
sorry.
tell us which way you're-
School performance contract.
And Chad is looking at the proposal from DPS. It was in the
Appendix A.
Appendix A.
Sure.
This does include the ones that Molly Freer already crossed out and sent back to you and said, agree, let's not deal with this.
You all should have that as well. But I don't know
Might
which
not
one you
operate
want
from that. I'm not operating from a crossed off list, so I apologize if I'm in
to-
delay.
We don't have a further version. The only version I have is the original version from the memo dated March 7th.
Are you talking about the memo that came out that had the list of non-waivable policies?
So
That was what I prepared. And then at the bottom of that, was obviously DPS suggestions, but then Molly came back and provided. It was
I
just,
don't have that.
when did she send it?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Oh,
So,
I'll get it.
Can I clarify on that for 1
Yeah.
second in process? The process was everybody got a chance to respond to this memo in kind. You know, Brandon, I'll use your as example. You wrote a brief synopsis, you sent it to Coulter. Molly weighed in, wrote a brief synopsis or changes. I think that was to be utilized today to guide and drive this further
I think
conversation.
Part of that problem though was like, I wasn't copied on Brandon's notes.
Yeah.
So I got his notes from Steve like 2 days ago.
Okay.
So I would suggest if we're gonna engage in these conversations in the future, and we know we have councils involved, every council needs to copy every other council
Yeah.
on what's going on, because I think there were a lot of sidebar conversations. And I
didn't
felt
know
like
this was
this last
happening.
week, I was trying to catch up, and it's not a very effective process.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great point. I'm taking this over from Molly Ferrer, and I know she said something to Coulter, but obviously I'm operating on an understanding that there's already this clarity that things have been crossed off the list, and so we're farther along. And that's not fair.
Yeah, and so if Molly's sending that, and nobody said to me, if you object to this, you need to send an email objecting.
Yes.
So I think we've got to get a more regimented process.
Yeah, I'm not finding what Molly sent, so if she sent it, it may not come to me if it did. I mean, and thank you, and I'm okay with that, because I didn't know you all were talking about me. I mean,
So regroup seems like
yeah,
a
party.
clerical error can be fixed.
Yeah, I think we can.
Next piece to answer the question, to maximize the 45 minutes of time we have here to respect all of you. Things on here that I think are easily adopters are school performance framework, because we have that, because we report to CDE. So that's a policy easily to put in place. Hazardous materials, asbestos management, that's their policies of facility building safety. Oh, sorry, Sonia, ECA, building safety, FAP, facility allocation, FF, naming of facilities. This is their facility. It is named FN, FNR, shared campuses. We don't have a shared campus. So, you know, we have to look at Molly's policy list.
No.
The-
I'm sorry, she's talking to me
Okay.
on my other, so.
My apologies.
In, are you saying?
I mean,
we have a shared campus,
we
so
don't
it's
have a
not
shared campus, so
necessary?
it's not
So
necessary.
you're rejecting it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we can consolidate a list,
Yeah, let's do that. Let's save our
Let's-
time. We'll consolidate the list and we'll separate. some of
okay,
that
that's fine.
separately.
Okay.
Yep. But I do believe I indicated with highlighter marks, all of the J policies that they are proposing, RMSEL should have a policy for those things and can have a policy for those things. So I don't think there's opposition there.
What would be your thoughts on, I really do want to make this as easy as possible, but that we have the foundational policies that you all are comfortable, that are consistent with your operations, and then a separate process on review so that you can come back and ensure there's something you want to add, something needs to be changed, that you have a standard review process. And then I don't know where these live currently, if there is.
On the website.
They are on the website?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. They're under governance, great.
Yeah, under governance policies.
So let's
But so
provide
the
a,
suggestion Brandon made was to say that RMSEL will adopt DPS policy with respect to facilities and special education. So am I hearing, Michelle, that you'd like that to be broader to foundational policies? Or is DPS suggesting, what is DPS's position in response to?
I think we should not necessarily close it down. I think that is likely going to be the bulk of it, but I do think there's some other things, like you just mentioned, the school performance framework is going to be something that you're going to be a part of, that you'd be willing to have. So I just don't want to make it too narrow. If there are things that you are comfortable with and think are appropriate for your operations.
So how about everyone else? Does anyone else feel strongly about, with respect to facilities and special education as suggested by Brandon, or being okay with opening it up to RMSEL will adopt DPS proposed policies as determined relevance, or as determined relevant by the RMSEL board? I suppose, because I would come back to you all for.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes, of course. I'm thinking, the suggestion is that we'd have a new paragraph in our IG that would read, RMSEL shall annually undertake a review of its policies. And then couple that with the language, which is splitting the baby, that RMSEL will adopt DPS proposed policies with respect to, the recommendation was facilities and special education. The counter is that maybe something broader like foundational policies.
That's so generic to me.
Yeah.
I don't even know what foundational policies
Yeah.
mean. So I'm open to other suggestions, but I'm gonna strike that language out of the IGA if it can't be a level of concrete.
Could we agree on the ones from your memo where you said this is consistent with, or we could do this? That we just,
I think what needs to happen is what Coulter talked about is we need to circulate a list where Renzel, like I see your list, but what I would have liked to have seen in that list is,
All the
yes, we'll
policies.
absolutely do this. And so I think for everyone's benefit, we need to circulate a list saying, these are all the ones that Renzel thinks are good.
Yeah.
And be really concrete about
Okay.
that, as opposed to me, some of them are equivocal in here, and I'm not really clear on if you're saying thumbs up or thumbs down. I
Yep.
put question marks next to some of them.
Yeah, well, it would be our decision. But to your
But-
point, we
But
need to have a
if
discussion. on it.
Renzel is saying, or Chad is saying, I think that this is reasonable, then I'd at least like to know from the
Sure.
administration's perspective that you think it's reasonable, and then I think that gives us all a better foundation.
Okay, so I'll work on that. Brandon, I have your suggestion. I've understood Michelle's, and I'll work on something to propose to all of you. But I do think that the policy adoption, review and adoption is separate, that it's not gonna be part of the IGA, just so I think we're all on that same page. So that the policy adoption will come before the RMSEL board in your normal course of your meetings to review those policies that we are trying to bring into our fleet as recommended by PPS at a later meeting. Okay, so, okay, that's helpful, thank you. The other, how am I spelling, I should say it today. So the other two issues I think are really the remaining kind of disputed, not disputed, that's a very negative connotation word. The two things I think we don't yet have meeting of the minds are regarding the student fee and our enrollment lottery. So I've tried to help council, with a little deeper understanding of how both of those work. Would it be helpful for the rest of board members to hear kind of what the unique issues are there? Or do we just want to talk what the issues are?
I think we've already had kind of a discussion of that today.
We
as to
have.
How the fees are used.
I
So
agree.
Don't want to waste time being redundant because we.
I agree.
we have.
So the point would be for the fee, the first example, RMSEL charges a student fee. We've heard it. We understand there's a financial aid component. Denver has requested that we not charge a fee. From our operational
or that
perspective,
it's voluntary.
yeah, or make it voluntary. Actually, I didn't know that. That's helpful. Thank you. We understood, I think, it was I understood, Chad, I don't know, a year or two ago, this, wipe it out, no consideration, and maybe voluntary.
It says as
So-
discussed, the expeditionary fee cannot be mandatory. It can only be a suggested donation.
So thank you for highlighting that, Michelle. The challenge for RMSEL, as we shared with all of you, is that we don't have other funding sources for our curriculum, for our crew trips and other things that this fee pays for. And so I would entertain an open discussion on others' positions on this particular item, as or what information we can provide you to have a full discussion on it.
From an equity lens, I mean, that's one of our core values. I certainly understand DPS's position that this could be a barrier for some students. And I think RMSEL has done a nice job through the years of providing this scholarship or grant fund or financial aid fund to ameliorate that problem. So I commend them for that. My concern is that I think from a practical fiscal perspective, to eliminate the fee or make it voluntary, when you don't have a game plan fiscally for an alternative funding source, is just fiscally imprudent. And so I think if this board were to consider eliminating the fee, there has to be a plan in place in advance for what is going to be done. And so that's my concern with the proposal, is that the proposal says eliminate the fee, but doesn't propose any alternatives for how are we going to backfill those funds. When you look just at the budget summary that's been provided today, 70% of RMSEL's budget goes to staff and things that are really non-negotiable. That doesn't leave them a lot of flexibility. So I think we would be open to discussion of this issue, but there's got to be a plan that goes hand in hand with this, as opposed to we're just going to eliminate a fee and not have a plan. In my mind, having known and worked for with RMSEL for 12 plus years, the landmark trips that they do and the other trips are really the foundation and essence of what the school is. And so if you then, because you don't have funding, end up eliminating those options. You're really negating the entire principles of this entity, and that doesn't feel good to me.
I would agree with that. I mean, I agree with that, that changes, with no fee, that changes the fundamental function of the school. But as a public school, like, right, that when you put a $1,400 price tag on something like that, right? So I know that I need to walk past the RMSEL store because that's not in my budget, right? I'm not even gonna walk in there and kid myself about what I'm able to do. And so we have to recognize that without marketing and without all these things in place, that some families are just eliminating themselves. And then when you say we have scholarships, I think about maybe, you know, as our world is watching what's happening in Ukraine, and some communities are getting those people. Like right now, if they come here, or other families, immigrant families, what if they don't have the proof that I'm not in this price bracket? I mean, I'm not in this tax bracket. There are people in our community who are unbanked, whether they, you know, take cash, and we can pass judgment about how we feel about that. But again, they have children that deserve to be educated. And so when you talk about fees or no fees, I get it, right? I'm the PTO person. I've been like, okay, you know, let's go sell all this bread or whatever the thing is. And that is a factor. And so if we need to ask the PTO to step it up or whatever that thing is, or to eliminate the fee or reduce the fee or whatever, but I think it's not okay to just say, we have to have the fee or else we can't do anything. And that's the issue that we all face. When Chad talked about Gallagher and Tabor, we are one of the wealthiest states in the nation, period. We have one of the most booming economies. I've toured this facility, it's beautiful, but I think it's absurd that we spend K through 12 telling kids not to smoke weed, and then we spend weed money to fund the building of beautiful educational facilities. I think that is the most ridiculous.
I appreciate your ethics, but I didn't have a problem taking their money.
That's no judgment of adults. You know, I drink a little wine, or whatever. But I just, you know, I think that first of all, as advocates for public education, we need to do a better job at telling our story. I'm my father's child. I want to keep my money. But I also value having great roads, great schools, great parks, great trails. And so we can't keep saying we provide this great expeditionary experience, but it's $1,400 plus whatever lunch money, you know, backpacks, you know, for some families, the fact is they have to drive here. That's expenses for your car. You know, that's more mileage, that's more tires, as opposed to my children who literally can walk up the hill and there's their school. And so, you know, I agree with Sonia that if we take it away, how are we going to feel that? But I think that needs to be a continuous conversation of how do we provide rainbows and unicorns without, you know, without charging families $1,400. I mean, like for my family, that I have 4 children, that would be over $5,000 a year. And that is not doable for a lot of families, period. And so when I'm clicking on the website, I just may not even try. You know, and sometimes it is embarrassing to go and say, yeah, we don't have it. And so I think we need to consider all of those factors as an ongoing basis. However we land, we need to always keep massaging that and keep pushing in, you know, legislatively about how we fund schools in Colorado, period. We should be at 12.5. We should be in Indiana.
Actually, Delaware.
And not, or even more, 14.5 or whatever. But, you know, yeah, I think some of the things we do, I feel the same way about this preschool. So we're telling people smoke more. And then we'll pay for your kids to have quality preschool. So now we're sending asthmatic kids to school. I just, yeah.
So when,
So Angela, do I hear you saying then that you are, and
I'm
this
saying a
is,
lot.
this is representing, this is maybe representing your personal, your board member role potentially with what you would believe to be its support of your board behind you, that you would support a fee, and the ongoing discussions around the fee at the RMSEL board table.
Yes, and I
but-
would also like to include the parent group to see if they
Yes.
are able to do more. So if that's reducing the fee.
Yeah.
Or if, I mean, I would like to see the fee, ideally, I would like the fee eliminated as well. Like,
Yeah.
I support that. But I know that that's not reality, that's not real life.
Yeah.
And so if that's telling parents to do more.
Yeah.
Looking at creative partnerships or whatever that looks like, but I know, again, you live by the grant, you die by the grant. So, but I think it should be an ongoing conversation about, and I think for all of our schools,
Yeah.
you know, if you have PTOs that subsidize things, you're not fully funded.
And just to kind of go off of that a little bit, suggested, you know, procedural language of anytime this mandatory fee is mentioned, whether it's on the website and right wherever it is, there is, you know, in parentheses, scholarships available every single time, so that whether a family's seeing it, whenever they're seeing it, they know that there's less of those challenges. I mean, if we have to, if this is the reality and a fee has to be what it takes to, you know, achieve the goals of the school, then make it known in every opportunity that a family would encounter, you know, that roadblock. Oh, this isn't for me, I can't afford that. There are options. And I would, you know, even that word scholarship, right? That's an academic word, no doubt, right? Does that word relate to everybody? You know, so, you know, call it what it is, you know, be cognizant of our jargon and make sure that those families know what they're reading, know what the options are, and in order to eliminate some of those barriers.
So I hear a support for a fee, again, just to make sure we're hearing each other the same way. Support for a fee, but maybe doing an audit or requiring this board or a committee of this board or the management to do an audit of what practices we are using to market and or may advertise the fact that we have a scholarship fund available for families that need it or would be able to use it to access our enrollment. And to maybe undergo another audit of what materials or how, what we were sending families about access to the fund, including the language we use around how we describe the fund. Okay, thank you.
Chad, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm happy to speak to it more, but I just wanted to make sure others have the opportunity since I know this came from us.
Yeah.
Didn't wanna-
In theory, getting rid of the fee sounds great, but I think that also the fee is for the trips, which is one of the foundations of the school. And so I think that that's why students come here. Maybe making it more known that financial aid is available, and maybe looking at the process behind that. It's not just the government requirements there, but maybe looking at a broader lens of, okay, maybe you fall within this tax bracket, but we see a need because of extenuating circumstances, and looking at that. But the fees are what are paying for these trips, and that's why students come here is for that experience. So I think that that's something we need to look at. And really, when you're talking about equity, I mean, transportation, I think, is probably the number one thing that this isn't an equitable place, and it's not going to be. It's, I mean, from that perspective, because you know, coming here, you have to get your kid here. Yes,
It's a choice.
right.
It's not the neighborhood school.
Correct. It's not, and it's not a charter school. It's not like that. It's not charter. It's not your neighborhood school that you're walking into. So I think we just need to be mindful of that it really is school of choice, and can provide more opportunities for financial aid. Yes.
So I hear support of a fee, possibly as maybe a component of this audit of our practices in offering scholarships, to consider a component of discretionary review of need. It isn't based on simple federal qualifications.
Is there any thought in
go ahead.
going to respective school districts, sending scholarship to there's no overriding to the specs to this Remsen, but it is available to the other school districts, obviously, so they have some money. Has that ever come up, or is that?
Well, no, I mean, it's obvious that none of your member districts, especially when I was asked by others, none of your member districts pay anything to RMSEL, in a way of saying, you pay us by your kids. So yeah, there has not been any financial commitment or contribution to RMSEL beyond allowing your kids to come to our school instead.
So what's the answer?
So yeah, so
Has
the
that ever
proposal
been-
is, would the members consider instead to eliminate the fee? To Sonia's point, we need to supplement some other way of providing for the fee. Would we just pay for each of the member districts? How much would that be, Julie? Do you have any idea what?
Can I clarify first? I
Yeah.
feel like the elimination of the fee doesn't feel accurate. Its fee is a
Oh,
condition of
voluntary.
enrollment.
Nice. I'm sorry.
So I have a child at Denver Language School. Immersion programming is very expensive. There are, things that they tell you, this is how much it costs extra to run our program. They ask for that money. I willingly pay it as a parent. Then I go to a gala and I pay more. So this is a reality of all of our public programming, right? But because it is clear from the beginning that it is not a condition of employment for my child to go to a public school and get a very great experience, it's not a barrier to entry to access that public school. So this is a school that offers a private school experience for a public school, basically, having all these incredible opportunities. And it has 9% FRL and 11 Black kids, right? So having these experiences that are truly incredible, but having them be available for more students who are not going to be going to these incredible trips to do civil rights and all of the things. I think our perspective is, how can we eliminate that barrier to entry? And it doesn't mean eliminating a fee. It means being creative so that we can think of other options to address those funding realities that you have to meet. So you could do things like, if it is voluntary, can everyone contribute a little more? So those scholarship amounts, if I would pay $100 more if that meant you had more scholarship available to do not just an FRL waiver, but maybe a sliding scale for families, because you are absolutely right. Qualifying for FRL does not mean you can afford this fee. It really just doesn't. So at the foundation of what we would love to see is something that we have asked of all of our schools in BPS, in charter and district. We know we're constantly fighting this because programming is expensive, especially when you're doing unique programming. But that we find ways that when you truly can't pay that you are not denied access to a public school and the great opportunities that public school provides.
And I'm embarrassed that I keep forgetting that voluntary component, I guess, in my head, and maybe you could elaborate. The voluntary component, I mean, how secure is that? I mean, do most families pay it, or would it be, Julie, you're
How do
saying?
you budget? That's how you budget, how you enroll, because
But-
we're doing budgets for next year.
Yeah,
Our enrollment happened in January, February, so we know what's coming in.
well, but you can't budget necessarily if it's an optional voluntary payment. So you have no idea how much you'll have. And frankly, RMSEL is on a, if I recall, Chad, on a back pay. You've already committed for next year's crew trips. So it almost seems, let's talk about the other elephant. We can't change the fee for this coming year. We can't change the fact that it's already necessary because we've committed ourselves to engage the business relationships for next year's crew trips. So do we need an agreement to agree later?
Well, it's equitable amongst the lottery. Anyone can apply, and it's a blind lottery. If you want to talk to the lottery, because that's the other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with fees.
Yeah.
So I think there's a few things that are going through my head, and one thing, because this, Brianna, sorry. Why don't you go ahead, Brianna, then I'll.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies that I couldn't be with you all today. I had to jump off for a moment to present some content for PEBC's board meeting, but I do appreciate the conversation, and also just wanted to share that I appreciate the potential solutions that are being offered to supplement or to replace a potential required fee. I do think that it is worth digging in further around issues of access to RMSEL. I also agree this is incredible, has an incredible curriculum and programming. And I think the scholarship structure, again, is another like a brilliant sort of support that RMSEL offers. The tension that I'm feeling is that that scholarship is providing access to people who are already in the door. And I think the issue is more around like who is actually even like coming to the doorstep, right? So I support continuing this conversation and exploring creative options for substituting that fee. I also support having a more of an unpacking of some of the access potential pain points in terms of access that RMSEL may be experiencing in terms of diversifying their student population. So one just quick notice, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm on the website right now. Oh, hold on a second. Oh, I'm going to scratch that. I was going to say that this is just in English, but I see that there's a language function here that would make it accessible. So I'll stop there, and thanks for your contributions again and the creative solutions that you're offering for this particular issue.
So a couple quick comments. I think this group's heart is in the right place, trying to solve larger systematic issues at a small institution. And I think those values are overlapping here. And I think we're all trying to solve these issues. I mean, you all have 8th grade classes. A lot of 8th grade classes across your districts go to DC. A lot of kids don't go to DC. That's a reality. It's not the reality we want. It's the constraint of which we live. I think we do need to lift up here with the things that we have eliminated for access. Every kid gets to participate in everything that we do. So I think there are good things happening here around equity that might not be possible in other places. I don't want to criticize other places, but there are a large portion of students that don't get to go to DC in 8th grade. Everybody here goes to Memphis, Little Rock, Birmingham. Everybody here goes. So there are layers in here that I think we could get behind language of, potentially IGA language around increase the scholarship fund by, sorry, Julie, you're going to grab me for my words and open, but, do we increase this, offset this over the term of the IGA to increase financial aid allowance by an additional 8% up to 20%? Like that's an initial step towards reducing this barrier. It's an incremental step. I think it gets at the essence of what Denver's advocating for kids. I think it breathes life into what we already do here around equitability for kids, because we have kids, refugee families across the board we've graduated every one of their kids. There's people that believe in us, people believe in the work that we do here. They haven't been turned away. So I think there's this conversation happening, and I'm another bigger conversation, I'll speak to Carrie, and I also had this conversation. We need to go back to like, what is the role of instructional options versus competitive choice? Because we're not in the competitive choice game, and we're in the instructional options game. And so, when I hear this thing about marketing and advertising and all of these things, I just sit there and go, dollars, 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 dollars. And maybe those dollars are better used into a scholarship fund versus out marketing and these pieces. I don't know the answer to that, but I would be open to a proposal that, we increase financial aid to up to 20% and from where it is now, and continue to work towards accessibility options for kids, knowing that once you are enrolled, the equitability factor is in place here that is really important. We have 14 minutes. I think we can at least propose writing that up and as an option.
I
Or-
just,
or-
I
Sorry, I'm looking at you
agree.
to my left.
Yeah, I agree with, I really appreciate your remarks, Angela, around all that about access with the fees. And Brianna too, that I think my question is more like, how do we get more people at our doorstep? I like how you phrase that. Chad and I have talked a lot. Many of you know that in my life as a Denver public school teacher for 27 years, I took over 800 students on 27 trips. So I totally understand the challenge of everything that goes into trips. But I also know you have to widen your aperture. So I appreciate what you said too, Angela, like how do we broaden our net of students who are at our doorstep and get them this opportunity? Because we know once they're here, they're well cared for. And that idea of increasing the scholarships and having a discretionary fund where even if you don't meet the hard and fast rules of whatever we've laid out, like their personal circumstances, which Julie's alluded to during the pandemic that RMSEL was really good at. How do we continue with that? And how do we, I love Zaretta Hammond, for those of you education people in the room, she always talks about widening your aperture. So I think that's what I'm interested in for RMSEL. The essential question, again, for the teachers in the room is how do we make this broader for more students? Because we all know what's happening here is the good stuff, right? Like this is fabulous. And I'm a huge believer in trips like this. That's why I'm on this board. And how do we get more than 11 Black students at this school? How do we have more than 8% free and reduced lunch? How do we get more students, to your point, Brianna, at our doorstep who can benefit from this? So this is a starting place. I really appreciate all of your thoughts for this conversation. Thank you.
Just to add to that, it's just a continued creative ideas. If you're interested, we could always talk about adding RMSEL to the choice materials that DPS puts out. So free advertising for you.
We're in there.
You're in there
Yeah,
already?
we're in there already.
Okay, done. If it were, that was easy.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. I feel
No.
like a middle school.
But even there, if there are ways that we can indicate that there are scholarships available to cover fees, things like that, that can encourage people to apply. I also know DPS has done a lot of work with our choice system to use FRL weights in certain situations to increase levels of socioeconomic and diversity in some of our schools. I know that may not work for your system, but there's a couple of ways we've done that, both on this identifying filling slots for students that qualify for FRL or applying a weight to areas of Denver that have higher FRL populations. So you don't necessarily know you're choosing a student who may qualify for FRL, but you have a much higher likelihood of choosing that. So I think you use the same choice system that we do. Not the
So let's
system, but
speak to
yeah,
enrollment because that's where we're going and
Okay.
to maximize time. I think that's perfect.
And I'm gonna reserve at least 5 minutes for another idea.
There's a proposal on the table around basically two enrollment systems running simultaneous to one another. DPS enrolling their 200 students, which isn't 200 students because it would be about 24 students annually because there are already students enrolled. And so you're only ever enrolling new students into the openings that exist. And then RMSEL continuing to run our system for the other 4 district partners, and then the 5th open enrollment option of out of district students, which we have 2 of enrolled in high school right now because there were no slots to fill those. The challenge there, I think, is in an institution of this size, running competing enrollment systems creates an administrative structure and a cost and challenges to us. We do actually use the same system. We pioneered that system prior to choice. We created it with Smart Choice Technologies to run a system independent of the school, because when I showed up, it was run on a spreadsheet and I was like, oh, that's not real secure. I'm also married to an auditor. So I was like, I don't like this. So that's when we worked with school Smart Choice to do that. I gave you some notes in that one pager on the front page of how that breaks down per grade level, per class, of how those spots go in. I think some of the administrative challenges that I see with running 2 systems is I do see that clause of equity. What students getting in from this system, what students getting in from this system, how are those in opposition to one another? And at the same time, the other component is if those things are run on alternative timelines, how are we filling sibling priorities? Because you can see in, like, I try to use a flat metric of proportions when we load this in. You can see the proportions on the front page. That's what you get per portion per class size. But for example, when I go to fifth grade, currently Creek gets 6.8 kids. So I apologize for that 2/10 of a kid that doesn't get in. But obviously something is happening with priority at fifth grade to where we have 8 kids there. That probably means that that's a child of a sibling, so that we would take that child in the enrollment priorities that you see there in our list of categories. And then if we take that child, then what does that do to a competing system? So what I would propose is, if there are weighting metrics of your system that you would like in conjunction with the current system, because they're now owned by the same parent company, Schoolment. I called another enrollment coordinator, said, can you explain to me how this works so I'm not confused? And the first words out of this enrollment coordinator's mouth, well, you log into Schoolment. I go, well, that's what I do. I said, so I think this is probably something we can figure out within reason. These are our current enrollment priorities. The board has actually reduced these priorities over the years due to specific factors that have happened. So for example, we used to have an expeditionary learning priority that we would take kids from an EL school. Well, at one point we had an EL school open a ECE. And so all of the spots from that ECE took all of that district's allotment. So there was never an open lottery. So we had to go back and go, whoa, because this is here, we have to remove this, because now a child to kindergarten doesn't even get a chance in a lottery because they're exercising this specific priority. So the board at the time said we should remove that, because at the time that was written, there were only a few expeditionary options in the metro community. Now that there are runs running ECEs and those pieces, we would get 4 siblings, then we would get 8 kids from the ECE, boom, district was closed down essentially to choice. So this list is very narrow in that it's staff, it's board members, staff, sibling, board members, and alumni preferences are the only preferences. If the board wanted to add in some type of metric or preference into this enrollment priority or policy so that we could run one single system, I think that would be something that we would be open to I'm speaking my opinion as the employee of the board, we would be open to. But I think running 2 systems is extremely challenging. And if that's my piece. So
I appreciate you that, and just so you don't feel like you waste your precious time. I thought the materials were very persuasive on that. I think that makes sense, running one system. We talked about that a lot with TPS. And so I think we'd love to focus the energy not on 1 or 2, but on how do we use this system in service of equity and access with you.
Great.
Now, so we talk about, I know, I don't think any school is at the marketing budget, but I think just, again, engaging parents and how to push in, if that's, there's the Juneteenth festival. I know they have either free or very cheap tables for nonprofits. Or even if you partner with Stride Health Center, can we have the corner of your table or whatever? I think we have to, push into those opportunities so that we can get, a fair and equitable lottery, and, to make sure that we do have a, good mixture of kids, and that that's going on. Right now, I would not be in favor of the alumni factor, just because the alumni is the alumni, and so we want to, again, to diversify and make it more equitable. I think maybe at some point down the road they can add that. But I think for now we can focus on, as Brianna said, getting everyone to our goal.
Before we were to eliminate that, would we be open to some specific statistics? Because my operationalizing of that, I think it's very minimally used. And right now, the families that I can think of, because I know almost every one of these kids in their stories, almost all of those alumni priorities are used by families that are non-white and families that are receiving support. So I want to be careful of the families that are electing to return under that. So I think that we get specific figures instead of subjective response. Would we be open to that? Because I'm just thinking about the kids that are here right now under that provision, and I'm like,
So
they would be eliminated.
How often do you consider these what do we call weighted factors?
So you have priorities.
Yeah,
So
priorities. How often does the board review those? Does the board ever review them? Or only on a request and?
it's been reviewed on a needs basis in the
Needs
past when we
basis.
looked at we removed the EL preference based on a cause.
Yeah, so I hear maybe some consensus around the idea of maybe one enrollment, one lottery is okay. But we want to eliminate the barriers to access again and equity. And so we want to do a review annually of what are our priorities to make sure they're in line with our board member district interests. Is that something that sounds?
Would reviewing the priorities once a year. I mean, not only is that a little bit of a lift, but is that too inconsistent for families? Is that
Where
too
you're
much?
changing it too much.
Right, so just something to be cognizant about. I do think it's worth revisiting more than like as needed. You know, we don't want to just be reactive and find any family or whatever in a situation where like, oh, we should have. But you know, 3 year, 5 might be too far fetched, but once a year might be too like inconsistent.
But I guess when I think of review, like, if you just give me a chart of the data every year, I think that's review. You don't have to, when I think review, I don't think like change. I just think, let me see the chart, how are we doing? And if we tinker, if we're getting to where we need to be, then let's keep going. And so, I agree that you shouldn't be like, oh, this year we're at this, oh, this year, but sometimes change is hard, right? And so just informing families that we're looking at our review, we're looking at our enrollment process. And so things may change. And if we need to even look at issues of grandfathering people in, if you're in, you're good. But going forward, this is what's gonna happen. I mean, we have those issues when we have to change boundaries, right? We're like, okay, this year, like, these families are in, but we're biting the bullet and everyone in this area is going. So it is hard, but I think if you communicate that, grandfather families in, but for me, review is a chart with no tinkering or a chart with a tinkering or a chart with an overhaul. Whatever's needed for whatever's best for the children, that's what I'm in favor of.
So, if I remember the idea correctly, it's this board that sets the enrollment process. And what I'm hearing is a majority of this board wants to engage in that work. Does it need to be?
You're right, there's no obligation that we do so annually, for example, but it's really to address, yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, I didn't mean to speak over you, but you're right. I suppose I need more direction from DPS in terms of what we would need to, I would agree with you that this board is responsible for enrollment. Do we need to revise the language around a review of the priorities, or what would help address that DPS's request?
I appreciate that. So in 10A, we had some proposed language on enrollment policy.
And we
And,
agreed that we could accept this.
and there's a sentence in there about the school will develop and implement an annual recruitment plan designed to provide access to all student populations. And I think recruitment plan maybe was read a little narrowly there. We're spending dollars to recruit kids when really I think this concept is we work together to think
Sure.
about how all these things intersect to increase enrollment for kids who would be so blessed to have an opportunity to be at this school.
Sure.
And so all of that, I think would help our board, and let Dr.
Yeah.
Wilson speak for, to say that this is just something we're really intentional about, because we have to be intentional in order to ensure equity in our schools. If we're not, it doesn't happen.
So maybe you don't need us to review annually. As it is now, it's on need and as needed basis.
It says we'll develop and implement an annual recruitment plan, so I
Well,
understand
sorry,
that
the
to be.
recruitment plan, but not
Yeah.
the
I think we
enrollment
could
process.
add a little bit of language in there that maybe makes it clear that's just a little broader than recruitment generally, and that's about.
I would say, again, I would say review annually, because I think that is a big deal. That is a big stinking deal. And I think, again, review doesn't have to mean add a new policy. If review is just that the board sees a chart and that we see
Sure.
demographic information, financial information, That's to me, that's review. And if the board looks at that and say, okay, we're on track, I think that's review. If the board looks at that and say, we need to look at this or tinker, or maybe look at this zip code we're missing or whatever, that's review. Review doesn't have to mean.
Start from the
Yeah,
beginning.
yes.
But is your interest to review the enrollment practices, procedures, and priorities? Or what is recruitment plan? How do we strategize or consider the barriers to access to try to,
To me, that's part, I guess, to me,
so the
that's,
whole thing?
that's,
Okay.
yeah, that's the whole thing, that you should, so maybe in 3 to 5 years, the recruitment plan or whatever changes a bit, or maybe, we achieve the goals we need, or, whatever that is, or, maybe you might get declining enrollment, right? And so maybe you're giving out incentives to families, and say, if you recruit 2 people, we'll give you $100 off. That's all of it. And so review is, I don't know if we have to spell that out, but I think review is all of it. Review the enrollment, review who's here, review how they got here, all of that.
Do you have any capacity to increase your enrollment or?
So that was a determination when we went forward with not trying to pull enrollment out of school districts, multiply the building, double enrollment. It was to continue, this project was to provide resources that our kids did not have that other students had in other buildings. And so we want to keep operating at this size, at this fashion. Be great to have a high school that was a little bit bigger because you diversify your programs and you keep those kids that are leaving at 8th to 9th grade. But then you create operational challenges of how do we take all these kids on these, it adds layers. And I also think that, the elephant in the room right now, you all are in declining enrollment. Me telling you, I'm going to move that shed. Thanks, DPS, I'm in. I don't know that will go favorably over. So I don't think there's any reason for the term of the IGA to discuss increased enrollment at this time. I don't think the need is driving that. I mean, you do have annual wait list of submitted applications range from 355 on the low to 463 on the high for roughly 60 spots a year. So the need is, or the desire is here from member districts.
I just throw that out there. Oh, I'm sorry, just to say quickly, if you had any capacity to add slots that an intersection with the choice system could be prioritized for FRL qualifying students.
Yeah, I think we just have to figure that intersection of our system and that system.
So you consistently have a wait list, but you're not at capacity.
Correct. So you have high school classes that will be smaller than other classes across the building.
So a wait list for certain grades perhaps, but there's other grades that maybe aren't full.
Correct. High school, not completely full, K through 8, completely full. But I think that's where you get these inversion pieces of like 142 kindergarten applicants for what oftentimes ends up being about 14 slots after you have your sibling preference. I think that's the.
So I think that leads me to Raymond, we sort of cut you off when we did the segue. Did we? Okay. Yeah. It may not have been in there originally. Yes. The enrollment procedures may have been reviewed, but not the recruitment plan, as we will work the tease the language out. So the issue, of course, is that we are pushing up against a renewal deadline. And one of the things we haven't discussed is term. And obviously, Chad, having been through this before, Sonia, you've been through this too, Julie, years of this. I think that RMSEL's preference is that we look at a longer term than what has been our practice for 5 years. Obviously, you all have the right to exercise termination, so that doesn't bind you necessarily, and it certainly doesn't bind you any more than you're already bound in the BOCES entity itself. But so that's an item that we haven't yet discussed, and I think that sort of is coupled with how are we gonna get all this done by July? And so a suggestion was made to me that maybe we consider, with the time that we have remaining today, I think it's appropriate. Do we agree to extend and give ourselves another year to finesse these requirements? Or are we gonna be ready to wrap this up? With a firm agreement, I guess I'd say. I mean, I think we're close, and so I don't want to hold anything back that we've done today, but even to just get this group together in the next month, I can imagine it's going to be challenging, and we have a July 1st, June 30th term deadline.
So question. We've had the full group.
Yeah.
I think there was consensus and conversation to provide you the work, me the work, to
think so.
revise this and bring it back to the group. I think to drag this through another year is
Yeah.
disruptive for school staff.
Yes.
I think we're close. I think we at least give it a shot to go back within a week to our
Yeah.
districts and allow
Okay.
them to bring it
Yeah.
Okay.
for any final commentary, and then get it before their boards voted and approved.
As we had originally considered. Okay.
Please, I mean,
try.
unless,
So
I think that time frame is gonna be really, really challenging. I mean, it all depends on when we all have our monthly board meetings, when we're able to go back and report. And so to say that we could turn this around in a week, I think that, and given other schedules and calendaring, it's really not realistic.
my apology on the week timeline, that was a week of
our work.
Culture and I to work
But
to
then
get
you're
you
gonna
a
have to-
document to put it on your timelines.
I'm just saying, I mean, maybe we can get it done by July, but with schedules and graduation starting, I'm just not convinced that this is realistic, to complete this. And so I think we might need to consider an extension of the existing agreement to allow us to finalize this stuff. I think we need a lot more information on specific things and language changes. So maybe it's doable, but when we're talking about 5 different entities, that's a lot of moving parts.
Year or start
I would be open to any proposals, whatever. I mean, I hear what Chad's saying. He doesn't want us starting to get the school. On the other hand, I'd like some flexibility so that we have to do this work with finality.
But I haven't heard serious disagreement on some of the requests. I mean, I think we've sort of been able to come to some agreement on language. I just need to get it to you and
But I
give you
want to
time to review it.
see the language,
Yeah.
and that's going to take.
Exactly.
some of the
So it
process.
sounds 2 to 3 months might be acceptable, not a year.
Potentially.
And there is some semantic understanding. I mean, a year sounds iffy versus 2, 3 months. We just need a little bit more time to hash this out.
We prefer to get it done by July.
Okay. Okay. Mary, what about this listing?
I'm sorry, what's the question, Penny? Because we got this really loud.
Oh,
Sorry.
I think the suggestion is 2 to 3 months or a year.
Or get it done now.
Get it done now, before July. I hear 2 before July. I think 3, maybe.
Well, I think for us, for Cherry Creek, I think we would say like October 9, because the sun was put like right now for me personally, and I know Ann, who's normally here, like we both have seniors. So between our, sort of pomp and circumstance schedule and then our personal schedules, and then our district for the most part kind of shuts down in June and July because we want to give our staff breaks. So there's like this rolling vacation thing that happens. And then, of course, August, I know we're planning a retreat and all those things. So I'm confident that we will be able to kind of suss through this. And so yes. And even like to the fee, like I don't feel comfortable single-handedly agreeing to say, yes, we would like the fee, because I know that there's some people on board that may not like the fee.
Right.
And so to say what is a reasonable fee or what is a whatever, or even, if there's an ask to have the PTO step up, whatever that looks like. October 1, I think is reasonable for us. I think with all that Sonia has on her plate, I think that would give her and her staff time with all the other legal affairs that we have going on to deal with that. That would be our ask. October 1.
Prefer not, but
I would.
Go ahead.
I'm in agreement with like 3 months maximum, just because October 1st and, end of year and beginning of the school year are both hellish. October 1st could sometimes be, and what have we learned from this pandemic, right? We don't know, like, what 6 months looks like. I'm leaning towards no more than a 3-month extension, just again to provide the school some stability, families who tune in some stability of what to expect, and knowing that I mean, our liaison work to this board and our respective boards can sometimes change too. Will this board makeup look different in October 1st, where in July or August, we might still be the same group of folks here. So
I think we can try.
Yeah.
I was gonna suggest that as well.
Yes.
Just a heads up for our procedures, we would need to know by the end of May, so I can get it on the June meeting.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
So that's our timeline.
Okay.
I also think if you turn around with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be on what's this huge issue, so
And there
I'm
aren't
cautious
huge
about-
changes. It's not like there's a whole new agreement that we're just minute
What's the
changes.
term?
Yeah, what's the term? We just haven't talked about that.
So there's proposed terms on, this has always been 5 years. Don't always have to do things just because it's 5 years. The document that aligns to this is our lease held extension with TPS, which is for 30 years through 2050. And so there's the 30-year option because this provides the ability to terminate within the heart of the document. So the district felt the need to exercise that. There's a clause to do that. And then I'll lean into reading Brandon's commentary. Specifically, he said, let's maybe find a reasoned piece of 10 years, because then it would allow a group of this nature to reconvene, to come together to discuss. So I 5 years is short, 10 years seems reasonable, 30 years maybe seems too long. I'd open it up. You're the clients.
What's 5 years short?
There's a lot of work in a given school year to bring everybody together in this fashion from 5 district boards, and not that much has substantially changed in the 3 revisions I've gone through, and giving you the opportunity as the client to terminate or to come together to revise. You have that right as the powers and duties of the board.
So you're saying that for us to come together 5 years is like a hard thing? Is that what I'm?
Well, there's also an expense. I mean, they have to pay for counsel to get involved, to review the documents. There's the administrative burden to provide a response on all the requests. And as we've talked, I mean, it doesn't ultimately change very much or give you more of a right than you already have to review any of the terms of the operation of the school while you're seated.
One of the things I hear is it's not concrete, and some feeling that these things you're talking about is stable. And if you have a shorter one, 5 years, that gives you an opportunity to see how it works, right? Forces you to go back and thought, I'm not.
Yeah. Oh, maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It just sort of sounds to me like a shorter one. At this point in time.
Yeah.
It's probably better, especially if you want to hit this July.
Yeah, there's
July
some,
1, which makes sense to me.
I think you're right.
I think if you push it out into October and further, there's more opportunity for people to disagree, if you will, rethink or have second thoughts. And it sounds like get it done now, in the short term, and then the next 5 years, and then something wrong.
I think my board colleagues would feel comfortable with 5.
I think we're at the 5-year level too. I don't think it's a short period of time. My concern with anything longer than 5 years is, who knows, to Steve's point, like all the players and people change and people forget the history. And so if you delay those reviews, you lose that historical context.
I guess in the review process, is it possible that since all of our districts already have counsel, that they don't have to hire you, or not you, like the term or whatever?
And Forgive me, I am not the most expensive person to the renewal process, but unfortunately, there's no one here representing the entity itself.
Okay.
So there has to be somebody to be able to wait through all of the suggestions. And I do mean it again, it is not the most burdensome part of this. It takes a ton of time, and I know you all can appreciate that. You work with Chad, you know how he is as an employee. For them to put together these reports and to dissect the information and to review those policies and to be prepared to answer your questions, even just at board meetings. And so it is kind of uncertain for them too, because it's like, oh, here we go again. It's like every year when your contract gets renewed, unless you're guaranteed that contract, you just don't know for sure if it's going to go the way that you want it to, which is to maintain this program as it is. So,
But I think that's
and that's
part of-
natural.
That's part of the deal.
That
right?
is.
That
You're
you wanna
right.
have this new and innovative, unique program that exists over here.
Yep.
That, yeah, one day the community might say no, or the community might say go this way, or they say go that way, and that's part of the
Yeah.
deal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think 5 years is perfect. And I think we should, because 5 years is, think about a kindergartner that's staying too much longer, we could be missing out on a lot of things.
Anybody else?
I'm sitting away from my council. Will you check your phone, Brenda? Should have planned it.
Technology.
So I think
I'm
Sorry,
wondering,
I saved you a seat. over
I know,
there.
and I didn't, came in late, so I didn't want to be that person. and
That's
here
okay.
I am.
Coulter, I'm wondering too, I've now sat through a few of these and it seems like our process for doing these
I was
reviews has
just
been, to my point, and I'm not being critical of anyone, but I tend to speak frankly, is lacks some regimen. And so I'm wondering if it would be good to add some language to the MOU that would set some timeframes. Like, I would tell you that when we're renewing our charter contracts, we start the fall before the contract is up for renewal. So starting the spring, I think puts us all in a bind, doesn't give us an opportunity to have, robust conversations, understand other perspectives. And so I'm thinking that we put in the renewal provision some language that sets some deadlines that anyone that would be proposing any revisions the next time around would submit them by, I'm just making
I
up
like
dates,
this.
but October 1st or something like that. And that they would be, provided to all parties, not just sent into Chad, but that, sent to the Cherry Creek Board, to Cherry Creek's General Counsel, all those things, so that we're
Superintendent.
communicating with a little more fidelity and have more time to think about these things. And I also think if we spread it out over a shorter period of time, it's less of a big haul for Chad to have to do in the spring when he's doing enrollment and trips and everything else.
Great suggestion.
Can we add in also how we involve the community in this? I feel like I've missed the ball as a board representative, reaching out to the community, asking them for their input on the IGA.
Are
So
you
in the
speaking to
timeline,
your community or to our,
the
community?
RMSEL community,
Okay.
staff, families, students, like just offering them the opportunity if they would want to comment on any of this, just to be sure that we're hearing the voices from the people who actually live the school day to day. I know Chad does a great job of representing, but I'd love to hear from people who experience this. What would they like to see in the IGA? What are, I'm sure they've got thoughts on what we've been saying. I love that idea of a timeline so that it's spelled out, so we know how we're involving
Mhm.
community.
And the community can attend those meetings.
Yep, and so they know and what the topics are and feedback.
I think one other piece that we've discussed with our board as well is any engagement around the structure of the BOCES as being right for the community. And maybe for families, that is not something that even registers is different. You go to your school and if it's charter district BOCES, it doesn't matter. It's what your kids experience, but does the community have any perspective on whether or not the BOCES is the right structure for the school?
The BOCES meeting, obviously the entity or the BOCES as a conglomerate or a cooperation or partnership of members, school districts.
The BOCES as a way to operate the school operating in Denver that could be charter district run or BOCES, any of those three.
But without that, wouldn't you lose all the people at the table representing our slots? for those students that from
That's
our
just a question
districts.
for the community.
Yeah,
'cause
she
we
just
don't-
saying if
Oh.
the
Yeah.
committee wants to change the format, is that an
And
option?
and we will be surveying the community
I
and
think it's a
they
weird
have historically.
question. I mean, this is a weird anomaly. It's an N of one. It's not the traditional BOCES models, and Steve can speak to that with his historical experience. This is really an oddball. Like, people ask me to describe what this is, and I'm like, well, it's a BOCES, but it's not
Right,
your traditional
exactly.
BOCES. I mean, so I think that's a fair question to ask the community. I really do.
Sure.
Thank you.
Do I understand it's an annual like solicitation of feedback or just an annual offer to participate in what the board believes are its priorities? I don't-
So I think one thing that we've been working on as a board is how can we better reach out to community and let them know we're here and we're listening. And we've gotten better. I know we're trying to attend DAC meetings. As soon as we get those on our calendars, we really want to have one of us be there so that the community knows who we are, just to streamline that communication process. But I think before the next IGA is up, to your point about the timeline, like we say, we announce it in Chad's weekly, in the field notes, like we're up for IGA. Does anybody have any comments? Attend these meetings. Like, how are we reaching out to the people who use RMSEL to let them know this is what we're talking about?
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I would propose then that I go back with Chad's help and we'll put together a revised draft. Of course, you've all seen, unless I should stop myself. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add that we haven't given you the opportunity to say? Okay, then we'll prepare the revised draft, the official revised draft. We'll send it out to, obviously, I'll have Chad send it to your clients and then I'll send it to all of you.
And Coulter, I'm not being difficult, but the
Yeah.
last memo you sent, I did not get. I ended up
Really?
getting from my board member, so I don't know what happened. The email that you have on the memo is right, but it did not come to me from you.
That is so odd,
So-
and I apologize.
I
Yeah.
know, so I'm like, fortunately, I got it from them, but I'm just saying, we gotta make sure that everybody's getting all the
Yeah.
information.
Okay, well.
And I don't have a problem even if Chad wants to send it directly. I mean, that's.
Yeah,
just
no,
not
that's
it.
fine. I don't mind that either.
Yeah, it could be a function of spam and especially within the schools.
It's not in my spam folder.
Oh.
It's, yeah, I check my spam folder every day.
Coulter blocked you.
I guess the most important thing is that we want to be sure. She's blocked me. Let's be honest. Is to be sure though that council, we continue, now let's keep each other on the email.
Yeah, so
And,
I would say that if you look at language, my recommendation would be if you want to tweak it, you redline it,
Yep,
and then you
send it
circulate
out.
it to all council as to what your red
Yeah.
line revisions are.
That's great. I love that idea. Then you can do the work with me. No, just kidding.
Happy to do that.
No, I think that's how we're gonna get there. Yeah, so thank you. I very much appreciate all of your participation and the preparation it took to get yourselves here and aware of all these issues. Chad, do you have anything else you'd like to add? And I know you have a remainder of the meeting with the board members. Would you
Yeah,
like to take a
sure.
recess while we all gather our stuff and leave? What do you think?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that all of the board can stay
Yeah.
for another hour or two. I know, yep, I
Let's
see.
just table.
So I think what we're going to need to do is table the rest of our items, and Chad, you and I can work on how we'll weave them into the next meetings. How's that? Does that work? I know you always give us amazing financial reports.
There's gonna be 2 budgets at the next meeting, the supplemental, which is on today's, and then the one for next year.
Okay,
So,
so reach out to Julie if you have any questions, and we'll just get those in the next meeting. So
Okay.
thank you, everybody, for the extra time. And I think this is where we adjourn. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate all of your feedback and thoughts. Good meeting. Thank you to our audience. It's been here as well and online. So thank you.
Thank you for all the